So I just had the chance to review NerdWallet's latest home buyer report, and I want to go over that because I think there's some key takeaways that are important to pay attention here. The headline here, I think, says it all. Home buyer optimism returns after a harsh 2020, right? And it says housing market of 2020 was unlike anything we've seen before. Totally would agree, except that all of 2021 so far has been pretty wild. Prices at high inventory was scarce, and buyers competed to take advantage of record low mortgage rates. Still the case. Optimism has been a reoccurring theme in our annual home buyer report since 2018. We reported on the positive outlook among potential buyers, informed largely by the share of Americans who plan to buy a house in the near future. This year is no different. 11% say that buying a home in the next 12 months, according to NerdWallet survey, among over 2,000 adults, would translate to 28 million home buyers. Just context, last year, all of the entire nation was a little over 6 million. So 28 million is pretty daggone high. Considering that each of the past few years, there you go, 5 million existing homes were sold, less than 1 million new homes were built, it would be impossible to reach the 28 million extremely optimistic, if not unrealistic buyers. Totally agree here. But the fact that so many have a positive outlook shows the stresses of the last year may be easing for at least some. Nearly 2 in every 5, 39%, of those who had planned to buy in 2020 postponed or canceled those plans due to the coronavirus pandemic. Totally makes sense. I actually had a lot of my own clients do the same thing. Matter of fact, I would say that actually a lot of sellers postponed because they didn't want people going through their homes. Maybe 1/4 of the number of people will actually buy a home in 2021, says Holden Lewis, NerdWallet home and mortgage expert. Millions of people are eager to own, and the pent-up demand keeps growing. In 2021, to be successful, buyers will need to prevail against competing offers, rising prices, and cautious lenders. All right, so let's go over some of these key findings. 1, the coronavirus pandemic interrupted but didn't quash home buying plans. 39% of Americans who had planned to purchase in 2020 postponed those plans, while 43% of those fulfilled those plans were in the process of doing so at the time of the survey. Now, I will totally say that this is definitely the case. I had more people than ever reach out to me in the last 12 months to say, hey, we're looking at buying. Can we go ahead and start that process? Lack of supply made the home shopping hard. Nationally active listings were down 26% in 2020 compared to 2029, according to NerdWallet analysis, making competition tough for buyers braving the market. What's really interesting is actually in our market was down almost 50%, literally half of the amount of inventory. We went from like 2-3 months of inventory down to like less than 1 in many cases at many price points in our area. Made it extremely competitive. Millions plan to buy in the coming years. 28 million Americans say that they plan to purchase the home in the next 12 months. Now, this falls perfectly in alignment with what has actually I've seen. I'd say anywhere between 25 to 50% of the people that reach out to me and say they have plans to eventually either postpone or decide they're not ready. Sometimes at my advice where I say, hey, look, you need to wait. Given the freedom of remote work, many look to new living locations. This one's really interesting. 44% of Americans have worked remotely at some point since March 2020. And 25% of those worked from home or other remote location and say that they bought or plan to buy a home in a different location. Now, obviously, like Sean works probably most, like 90% from home? Yeah. I mean, other than filming like today, you work from home. King, our editor, works completely remote. He doesn't even live in the same area as us. My wife and her team mostly work remote. That's totally in alignment with what we're seeing. Ongoing home ownership costs are major financial stressors for recent buyers. 41% of those who have purchased home in the last 12 months saying affording home repairs and maintenance is one of their biggest financial stressors, and looking in the coming 2 years. More than 1/4, 28%, recent home buyers citing that their monthly mortgage payments are among the biggest money stressors for the next 2 years. I totally agree with this. I say it all the time. Please, please, please start this process early. Buy less than what you can afford, and budget for those maintenance and repairs. Again, a good rule of thumb here is anywhere between 0.5% up to 2% depending on the age and condition of the property. All right, so pandemic was not the only stumbling block. Despite home buying market being robust in 2020, many people decided to hold off their mortgage plans and settling for virtual home tours. Closings in parking lots are stiff competitions from other buyers. We actually had a lot of this. We see probably 90% of the people that reach out to us from YouTube are people that are moving from out of town into the area. and we've done a lot of virtual showings. Now we have some great software and technology to do that, and we typically always advise those people to buy with a home inspection contingency so they can at least fly out here during that home inspection process and make sure that the home is the right fit for them. Among current non-homeowners, there are several additions to obstacles. The most commonly cited things preventing this group from pursuing homeownership at the time, according to this survey, is not having enough saved for down payment, 38%, credit score, 32%, and what is particularly tough to overcome in 2020. Very low mortgage rates drove up demand for purchase and refinance loans. Lenders responded by tightening standards. It became more difficult to get a mortgage if you didn't have liquidity, impressive credit, though some options remained and still remain available. I, again, would agree with this. As soon as there is uncertainty in the market, lenders tend to tighten things up and not free them. They are looking for strong, smart investments, right? They want to make sure that when they're investing their money, they're actually going to get it back. And so when more uncertainty enters the market, usually the standards either tighten or interest rates go up. So which of the following are preventing you from pursuing home ownership at this time? So this was the survey they did. The number one was not having enough saved for down payment. Now that actually kind of surprises me a lot, and maybe that's just because our market is heavy on VA, which is 100% financing, and usually the interest rate is extremely competitive. And if you have decent credit, you can do a 3% conventional down payment program. Now, that may not always be the best advice for you. Putting more down might actually make sense long term. Again, that's something you can go over with my wife with, but it actually surprised me that that's the number one thing. Number two is credit score. This doesn't surprise me at all. Another one of the reasons I tell people all the time is to start the process early is because usually what their Credit Karma or whatever it is that their online thing that they're doing is not my FICO. And the algorithm to calculate your credit score for mortgage is actually a different algorithm, maybe for a car or something else. And so that doesn't surprise me at all. The third one here would be the coronavirus pandemic. Now, depending on where you are in your health, personal health, and what your political affiliation here is, I can totally see how this affects people. The number one thing that was for most people was people with comorbidities and over certain ages, and so that totally makes sense that a third of the people basically here were nervous about pursuing homeownership. One that I am really surprised down here is it says local housing market is too competitive. I'm really surprised that this is this low. 11%, I would probably put this one actually up towards the top. This really doesn't surprise me all that much. A lot of the conversations I had with clients this past year was, hey Dan, should I wait to buy? Because everything they're being told from people that had just bought or are out in the current marketplace was that it's too competitive and that they should wait. So I kind of expected this to be much higher. 9% said that it was more affordable to rent than to buy. I would say in our market, that is still not the case. Almost at every price point below $500,000, it still makes sense to buy if the intention is to own the property for a long period of time. This one also really surprised me is I believe interest rates will be lower in the future. Man, you are just completely ignorant of history if that is the case. Interest rates used to be as high as the teens in the 80s. The reality is anything below 4% is incredibly low, and anything below 3% is basically insane. All right, rolling down here, we see 2020 buyers found homes in short supply. Not every home buying hopeful let the crises of 2020 stand in their way. Of the Americans who plan to buy in 2020, 43% either purchased a home or were in the process of doing at the time of the December survey. These buyers were faced with short supply of homes across the nation because of the would-be home sellers holding off on their plans due to the pandemic. I can totally agree with this. Had tons and tons of sellers say, I want to wait, it's too uncertain. And the reality is if you're a home seller, you become a home buyer, and if it's in the same marketplace, the concern becomes, well, if I sell my house, will I be able to move into the house that I want, or will the house that I want even be available? More than 1/4, 28% of current homeowners say the coronavirus pandemic is preventing them from putting their home at the market at this time. So this is one that I've showed in this chart to multiple people, and this is active listings across the nation. The supply of homes sale was very low in 2020, but fell dramatically as the coronavirus pandemic related economic effects took hold. So you can see this is what's called seasonality, is when you can see January, February, March, and it's slowly going up. Then you have the peak during the summer, right? And then it precipitously drops off towards the end of the year, and the whole cycle starts over again, right? And so what you can see here is 2018 was pretty high. 2019, it kind of looks like it was high, but a little bit lower. 2017 was high. The same pattern basically exists here, but what you see here for 2020 was this extreme drop off on the amount of listings that were available. Prospective buyers are optimistic about 2021. Obviously, this was done towards the end of 2020, but they didn't release this till later. Let's see here. Of those planning to buy over the next 12 months, 58% say they feel better about their ability to purchase in 2021 compared to 2020. That's been really interesting. It's actually, in a lot of ways, become more difficult. That's really interesting because in a lot of ways, it's actually become more difficult, not less difficult. Things have trailed off a little here towards the end of the year, right? Because they only do this report once a year. So I'll be interested to see what the report says in either January or February when they release the new one. Among all the Americans, 43% say the current economy and political climate would make them more likely to buy a home in the coming year if they were in the market for a house, slightly down from 49% last year. If you were in the market to buy a home, would the economy and political climate make you more or less likely to buy a home in the coming year? Interesting that it's consistently gone up. That just shows that people are becoming more and more optimistic, which is generally a good thing. What I find actually interesting about this is that I would have probably guessed a lot of the opposite here, that people would become more pessimistic and not more optimistic, especially with the amount of inflation that we've seen over the last year and the amount of shortage that we've seen over the last kind of 12 months with inventory going down. So I'll be really interested to see where these things go into the future, and I'm generally optimistic. So let me know down in the comments below, are you optimistic or pessimistic of the future? Do you plan to make a move? And if you are, you can obviously get a hold of us down of our contact information down below in the description, or jump directly into our calendars there below.